Coming up on the GRIMM Exchange.
Going Goth, Grimm guest Professor Dr. Markus Stiglegger and culture and media historian Katharina Rein break down the art of Gothic horror films.
And we'll be reviewing a classic, Frankenstein, with Stuart Bannerman, writer and editor for From Page to Screen.
And we give you the gift of sleepless nights as we have a little chat with Lucas Paulino about his short film Bedtime Story. This and more on today's episode of
The GRIMM Exchange.
Hey horror fans, I'm Mariam.
And I'm Marcus, and welcome to the GRIMM Exchange, your one-stop shop for all your horror entertainment news needs.
To stay up to date with all our content, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. What is up in the world of horror? Let's check out the latest horror headlines.
The TV adaptation of Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer begins a brand new season this month on January 25th, and a third season has already been ordered. Set after the world has become a frozen wasteland, Snowpiercer centres on the remnants of humanity who inhabit a perpetually moving train that circles the globe. It deals with class warfare, social injustice, and the politics of survival. Fangoria has recently announced a launch of Fangoria Studios to develop and produce film, television and podcasts using the iconic Fangoria, Starlog or Gorezone brands with an eye towards developing a slate of sci-fi and horror projects with global appeal. Circle of Confusion will represent them in all three areas. There are many great stories in the genre that have yet to be told from cultures rich with folklore and monsters of their own. When it comes to horror, everyone screams in the same language. We celebrate the genre communities being massive and diverse. Fangoria Studios seeks to create new icons of both genres in front and behind the camera. Ares Dragonis' new game, The Shore, finally has a new trailer, and if that weren't enough, a release date, which has been set as the 19th of February this year. It's a one-man development team which has worked hard to create a stunning Lovecraftian nightmare. You play as Andrew has been run aground on the mysterious island and must search for his daughter while battling terrifying monsters and keeping his own sanity intact. Shudder has tons of new content coming in the next few weeks, including 10 brand new original and exclusive horror movies. Also, The Last Drive-In will return next month with a Valentine's Day special. Joe Bob Briggs hosts a double feature of two unusual films about the power and horror of love. The special Joe Bob Put a Spell on You arrives on Shudder on Friday, February 12th at 9 PM Eastern. The Schneider cut of the Justice League is on the way, and there's been a lot of hype and hope for alternative versions of other films that were very different to how the original director envisioned them. Suicide Squad is one of them. The final product ended up messy, and we lost a lot of footage of Jared Leto's Joker. Recently on Twitter, a clip emerged of Leto's Joker with a burned face and him exclaiming, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Needless to say, it's got fans hopeful for the haircut of Suicide Squad, which may show a darker Joker. Fans of both Predator and Fortnite can now play as the Masked Hunter in the game. The character skin is available to unlock for current Battle Pass holders via new challenges. Predator is also a roaming boss within the game and can be found in the aptly named jungle-themed stealthy stronghold. If you are able to defeat Predator, he will drop Predator's cloaking device, which lets the player temporarily become invisible. Finally, we all love Nicolas Cage, and he's gravitated towards the horror genre for some years now. We're all going to see him battle some really creepy animatronics a la Five Nights at Freddy's in Willy's Wonderland, which premieres and is available to watch at home on February the 12th. The synopsis for the film reads, a quiet loner, Nick Cage finds himself stranded in a remote town when his car breaks down. Unable to pay for the repairs he needs, and agrees to spend the night cleaning Willy's Wonderland, an abandoned family fun centre. But this Wonderland has a dark secret that the janitor is about to discover. He soon finds himself trapped inside Willy's and locked in an epic battle with the possessed animatronic mascots that roam the halls. To survive, he must fight his way through each of them. It's enough to put you off going to Disney World. And those were your horror headlines. When we hear the word Gothic, we all have images that come to mind. May it be the subculture, architecture, or even elaborate makeup looks. Today, however, we are looking at Gothic horror films. What does a good Gothic movie plot need, and what makes that distinctive visual style? Today, we'll be taking a look at this with an expert in film, Professor Dr. Marcus Stiglegger.
Warning: the next segment contains spoilers for the following films. Steeped in romanticism, darkness, and often set in a place of great stature and decay, Gothic horror is instantly recognizable by its classic aesthetic and themes. It has survived the constant changes and trends of modern horror to become an enduring staple of the genre that never seems to go out of fashion. Gothic cinema has its roots in literature from the 18th and 19th centuries, with most early films being adaptations of classic Gothic tales, the most notable being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dracula, and Frankenstein. It's alive! From the universal output of the 30s, and then again when Hammer horror took on these classic adaptations 20 years later in the 50s. Katharina Rein, German historian of culture and media and author of the upcoming book Gothic Cinema, explains her view on the translation from literature to film. Any translation from literature to film, of course, is visualization. This is particularly relevant when it comes to Gothic because it is a genre that primarily works through aesthetics and atmosphere, which can be transported via images very effectively. So while Gothic obviously has a long tradition in literature, some of the works that are rated among the world's best literary works of Gothic, such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or Bram Stoker's Dracula, it is actually predestined, if you will, to be expressed in audiovisual terms because it relies so heavily on atmosphere and aesthetics. But Gothic cinema has shown its popularity has not faded in recent years, with big hits like The Others, Crimson Peak, and the Netflix shows The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. While the technical aspects of Gothic cinema may have improved over the past century, the elements that make up a key Gothic horror piece remain unchanged and are as important as the characters the stories center around. So what are these key elements and themes? Usually a big house central to the story, often daunting in size and decaying. It represents the evil lurking underneath. Professor Dr. Marcus Stiglegger, professor of film studies and writer of Cruising from the Devil's Advocate series, talks to us about the components of Gothic horror films.
Gothic horror has a very long tradition. It goes back into other arts like Gothic fiction and literature, and this goes back into the 18th century. So we have to look at those early novels and early poems dealing with mortality, dealing with the present haunted by the past, and by old buildings, ruins, graveyards, cemeteries, tombs, and so on, which became a kind of iconography of horror, but with a very dark romantic drive. And this is probably something which became a continuity during the 20th century up till now, especially when it was adapted into cinema.
Bram Stoker's Dracula is a prime example of this, where Jonathan Harker travels to Dracula's castle, not knowing the danger that lurks behind the man he meets. Another example is The Others. Grace, played by Nicole Kidman, lives in a huge mansion as she struggles to come to terms with the truth of what she and her family really are. The house they inhabit is an extension of their own isolation, separating them even more from the real world. The setting is successful in creating a genuine feeling of unease.
What have you done with my daughter?
Are you mad? I am your daughter.
Ghosts and monsters are central to all these stories in some form, blending the past with the present, the sinister with reality. but often our perceptions of what monsters are turned on their heads, and sympathy to the darker forces are tested. The most infamous example of this is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was adapted by Kenneth Branagh in 1994 into a movie rich with other Gothic themes like romance, tragedy, and death. Here we are forced to look at humanity through the eyes of a monster, and our sympathy lies with him. Taking this further, many movies play with the corruption of innocence, seen most recently in the vivid modern Gothic masterpiece, Crimson Peak. Here, Edith, played by Mia Wasikowska, is wooed by the seemingly charming Thomas, played by Tom Hiddleston. But he and his sister lure Edith to an unknown place where she knows no one to take advantage of her pure nature.
I have to get away from here.
Edith, this is your home now. You have nowhere else to go.
Rein talks to us about the challenges we face when creating a modern Gothic film. The traditional, historical aesthetics, characters, and tropes of Gothic cinema have in fact become more popular in recent years, with films such as Guillermo del Toro's Crimson Peak or TV shows such as Penny Dreadful. Penny Dreadful reveals the very conflict that this creates, being set in Victorian England and picking up characters and motives of Victorian Gothic literature classics. At the same time, it tries to implement 21st century values such as feminism, bringing these narratives up to date or rendering them timeless, and also creating an aesthetics that is reminiscent of classic Gothic cinema, but does not bore its fans to sleep, is a challenge. One that, in my opinion, was mastered in Crimson Peak. Although often depicted in the past, recent adaptations have placed classic stories in modern-day settings. Most notably, Mike Flanagan's adaptations of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House and Henry James' The Turn of the Screw, renamed The Haunting of Bly Manor. Here, all the classic Gothic tropes are interpreted into modern-day scenarios, but the essential themes are present: the dark, foreboding house, ghosts come back to warn people of danger, stormy weather that conjures a growing sense of unease. We may be in modern times, but these horrors are old school. All these movies have vivid color palettes, rich reds that couldn't be bloodier, white clothes draping from innocent characters blinding in their representation of purity, and the gray of a fog or winter's day clouds the judgment of the characters on screen, creating a sense of confusion and disruption. Tim Burton, another modern director who has his own eccentric twist on the Gothic genre, uses colors to create his unconventional world, a world that is dark yet full of life. Beetlejuice, for example, is a film set in the afterlife, yet it feels so vibrant and colorful. Nothing is done without thought. Everything you see on film is intentional to pull you deeper into this mysterious, strange world.
Gothic horror could also be considered the classical vision of horror, and thus it is a kind of constant element which you can refer to in the present and also in the future. So it will always be kind of similar to its sources. What we consider to be the contemporary element combined with classical Gothic horror, that can change, and it always changes. And the funny thing is that sometimes early era readings of Gothic horror, like a film from the 50s, can at some times be considered more modern than a film from the 70s because of a change of these discourses. So the modernization is always a question of how it refers to the contemporary ideas that are fashionable at the moment. And so what we consider Gothic horror as a classical element, that's the constant thing.
Together, all these elements combine to create the rich tapestry of what makes Gothic horror so layered, a genre you can get all consumed by and become lost in, much like reading the Gothic novels that started it all.
And now, loosen up a bit. Follow me as we enter the Grimm Zone.
This episode's Grimm Zone is sponsored by Little Btch Cross Stitch. Little Btch Cross Stitch is the best place to get alternative and controversial cross stitch and embroidery cards, gifts, art, and decor, all of which is handmade. This one-of-a-kind artwork is a must-have for anyone who wants to remind their friends that they love them like flies love poo. This month, GRIMM EXCHANGE viewers get 10% off a minimum purchase value of £20. So go to this website, type that promo code, and enjoy.
Today's Grimm Zone is dedicated to a very impressionable actor. Do you love him or hate him? Either way, you know his name. We're talking Nicolas Cage.
Lucky for us, Mr. Cage doesn't only swap faces and fly with criminals, he also makes horror films. So join us as we take a look at our favorite Nicolas Cage horror films.
Colour Out of Space. Adapted from the H.P. Lovecraft novel The Colour Out of Space, this movie is one of the more recent on this list and sees Nathan Gardner and his family confronted with a mutant extraterrestrial organism that infects their minds and their bodies after a meteorite lands in their front yard of their farm. Mom and Dad. This 2017 comedy horror follows a teenage girl and her little brother as they try to survive a hellish 24 hours while an unknown phenomenon causes all parents in the world to violently attack their children. The Wicker Man. Inspired by the 1967 novel named Ritual, this film starred Nicolas Cage in a rough remake of the 1973 classic. When Edward gets a letter from his ex-wife telling him that his daughter has gone missing, he sets out to find her. His journey brings him to the secluded island, which is the home to a cult that participate in bizarre sexual rituals and human sacrifice. Mandy. Set in the early 80s, Red and Mandy are a couple who live peacefully in the woods. Their lives are torn apart when they become the focus of a psychotic cult leader and his demonic followers. After they kidnap Mandy, Red goes on a rampage of revenge to save her. Pay the Ghost. When Mike's son goes missing at a Halloween parade, he and his estranged wife are haunted by strange events. A year later, they get a lead when they learn about common disappearances on Halloween that have roots in a dark history. Drive Angry. Released in 2011, Drive Angry follows Nick Cage's John Milton, who, having been thrown into hell for his crimes, has to escape after cultists murder his daughter and take her baby. Behind the driving seat of a fire-red muscle car, he pursues the cult leader who plans to sacrifice his grandchild and unleash hell on Earth, all while being hunted by Satan's henchman who wants to drag him back to hell. Ghost Rider. After selling his soul to save the life of a loved one, motorcycle stuntman Johnny Blaze now transforms into Ghost Rider. As the only one who can walk in both worlds, Johnny is charged by Mephistopheles to destroy Blackheart, an evil demon that wants to overthrow Mephistopheles and create a hell worse than, well, hell. Season of the Witch. After years of fighting the Crusades, a knight named Bemin returns to Europe only to discover it has been dominated by the plague. Bemin is tasked by a dying cardinal to take an accused witch to a remote abbey, where monks will remove her powers and finally put an end to the pestilence. As Bemin and co. progress on their quest, they come to the realization that the prisoner is no ordinary girl, and that there are evil forces in waiting. Vampire's Kiss. New Yorker Peter has a life that revolves around making as much money as possible and sleeping with as many women as possible. Things take a drastic turn after Peter is bitten on the neck during his latest sexcapade. The next day, Peter is convinced that he is now a vampire, and while nobody shares his point of view and he doesn't seem to have changed at all physically, he dons fake fangs and begins stalking women. Next, we would like to introduce Stuart Bannerman. He's both writer and editor for the website From Page to Screen, and today he's reviewing not a new film, but a classic, Frankenstein from the year 1931.
The year 2020 was a very strange year for everybody. And as we're now into 2021, it kind of feels a continuation of that year. The major blockbusters aren't coming out. They will at some point, but who knows when. So I'm going to have to wait a little while for my Top Gun Maverick and my No Time to Die fix. So I've been going back and watching a lot of films that I haven't seen for years. And with all the streaming platforms out there and the broadcast of TV and shout out to Grimfest's wonderful YouTube channel, which is great if you've not checked that out. I'm able to go back and watch films that I don't have on my Blu-ray shelf. One of the films that I went back and watched was, it's kind of stunning to think that this story was written over 200 years ago. And the film came out in 1931, and it is James Whale's Frankenstein. Now, I've seen this film. I remember watching it as a child on BBC Two, around 6 o'clock at night. They used to show a lot of these Universal monster movies. Now, Frankenstein is one of those. It is starring Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein and Boris Karloff as the monster. A lot of people call him Frankenstein for some reason, but he is actually Frankenstein's monster. He's credited in the credits as a question mark. Kind of weird. So I went back and watched that. Now, if you haven't seen the original Frankenstein, I can't recommend enough that you go back and check this film out. In its 70-minute runtime, there are no gun battles. There are no car chases. There are no computer effects. There are some of the best cinematic performances and some of the most stunning black and white photography that I have seen in films, even to date. It is a very simple tale. Henry Frankenstein is a mad doctor, mad scientist, and he decides that he's going to try and make life out of death. So he takes body parts from various corpses and makes it into the monster, aka question mark. Things don't go very well though. And I'm not telling you any more than that, because you know what? Part of the beauty of Frankenstein, if you've not seen it, and my God, I envy you if you've never seen the original 1931 Frankenstein film, is just seeing where this film goes. The performances are amazing. And then once you've watched the film, treat yourself. Go look at some of the trivia. You'll learn like crazy things, like each of Boris Karloff's boots were 13 pounds in weight. That guy had to actually walk around carrying those. There is a scene with a little girl in there. I'm not going to spoil it, but she had to do this scene multiple times. You don't really want to, but the director, James Whale, actually said, you know what, if I'll do it, I will give you a dozen hard-boiled eggs. And she did the scene, and she was actually given 2 dozen hard-boiled eggs. Nowadays, kid actors would want a couple of $1 million, but back then you could literally get what you wanted from them, performance-wise, just with a whole bunch of eggs. Amazing. Hollywood has changed a lot. For filmmakers out there, if you want to make a movie, go back and watch some of these Universal monster movies. Phantom of the Opera, Dracula, The Invisible Man. You watch the remake with Elizabeth Moss, that is amazing. But you go back and watch the 1930s film, you go, how on earth did they manage to do that back then without the aid of green screens and computers and stuff? It is truly mind-blowing. So I am thoroughly enjoying my revisitation of the Universal Monsters movies. You can find some of them online, but you can buy a really cool Blu-ray box set with them all, which is, I have that somewhere in my house. But Frankenstein was on the YouTube channel, a film production company put it on there. We hosted a watch party. There was a whole bunch of people. It was a lovely mix where people who had seen the film before and a whole bunch of people that had never seen 1931's Frankenstein before. So it was an absolute treat watching them be shocked at where the plot was going and just find out afterwards what they actually thought of one of the best films ever made. So check out Frankenstein 1931 now.
If you want to check out more reviews, interviews, and podcasts, go to FromPageToScreen.com.
It's no secret, we here at Grimfest, we absolutely love horror, a big part of that being horror films. And as per usual, we want to meet the horror-loving filmmakers who have created these independent works of art. So let's head to our Grimfest basement and see who we can meet today. Ah, what have we here? Bedtime Story. What's that? Lucas Paulino, director and writer of Bedtime Story. Hello and welcome.
Hola Marian, how are you?
Estefania Gimeno, the assistant of Lucas, his right-hand gal, if you will. Welcome.
Hola, Mariam. Hello.
Please do us the honor and tell us a little bit about your short film Bedtime Story.
Bueno, nada, Bedtime Story es nuestro primer corto. Es una historia clásica de terror. De hecho, es un cuento, un pequeño cuento de terror en sí mismo.
So, Bedtime Story is our first short film. It's a horror short film, and it's like a little fairy tale horror story.
Es una historia clásica donde jugamos un poco con la ambigüedad de una madre que está pasando un mal momento con sus hijos y no sabemos exactamente si esta bruja existe o si vive realmente en la madre en sí, ¿no?
So it's a classic horror story. A stressed out mom and another element, which is a witch. And at some points we doubt whether the mom herself is the witch or not.
Tengo 43 años y sigo durmiendo con la luz encendida.
I'm 43 years old and I still sleep with the lights on.
Fascinating. And what would you say gives it its unique character?
O sea, es muy ambicioso pensar que nuestro corto tenga algo que no tenga ninguna otra historia de terror.
It's very ambitious to think that our short film has something so unique that makes it completely different to any other short story or any other horror story.
Pero supongo que tiene algo muy primario de mis miedos de la infancia.
But I guess that it has something very deeply related to his childhood fears.
La bruja que tenemos en el corto es una bruja muy concreta con la que yo soñaba desde pequeño.
The witch character in the short film is a very specific character that he would dream of during his childhood.
Entonces supongo que para mí sí que representa pues algo más especial. No sé si para el resto de los espectadores le aportará algo totalmente novedoso.
So that's what makes it really special for him, in the sense that it has something very, very unique and related to himself that hopefully will somehow be felt by whomever is looking at the story.
Más allá de que es un corto que está de puta madre.
Aside the fact that it's an incredible short film.
Well, I am quite intrigued, if I may say. Time for a teaser, wouldn't you agree? All right, and now my favorite part, fun facts. Can we hear them? What do you got?
Fun fact. Bueno, pues lo primero que recuerdo, que creo que es una anécdota pequeña pero que es interesante, es muy simple, es que nuestra bruja en realidad es un hombre.
So the first thing that he remembers is that the witch character in the story is actually a man.
Es un hombre que maquillamos y al que le pusimos una prótesis en el pecho, vamos, le pusimos cuerpo de mujer.
Is a man that, as part of the production, had makeup and all sort of elements into his body so that he would look like a woman.
Y creo que es interesante porque eso hace que nuestra bruja con muy poco sea un ser extraño y especial.
And this is interesting because it makes our witch be a very exceptional and unique character.
Y unido con esto viene el fun fact.
So, along with this, there's another fun fact.
Que que es que, claro, teníamos separados en una habitación a los niños.
So we had the kids separate in another room.
Hay dos protagonistas niños en el corto, uno de 11 años y otro de 7.
There are two kids in the story. One is 11 and the other one is 7.
Y teníamos a la bruja en otra habitación aparte para que el niño pequeño no la viese.
And we had the witch character in another room so that especially the little boy wouldn't see her.
Y la bruja en un momento, absolutamente desnuda, va un momento al baño y se equivoca de habitación y entra en la habitación de los niños.
So the witch, in a certain moment, needs to go to the toilet. So she walks out completely nude and makes a mistake. And instead of walking into the bathroom, walks into the room where the kids were.
El niño de 7 años nunca volvió a ser el mismo.
The 7-year-old boy would never be the same again.
Sigue teniendo un trauma.
He's still traumatized.
Tuvimos que parar el rodaje, hablar con él, pero fue bastante duro.
So we had to stop all the shooting. We had to take some time with him.
Los padres.
Talk to him, talk to the parents, and try to get everything back to pace.
Fue horrible, pero a mí me sirvió para darme cuenta de que teníamos una gran bruja.
It was horrible, but at the same time, it made it clear that we had a fantastic character.
Well, it's been absolutely splendid having you both on the show. Thank you very much for your translation work, and thank you very much for your insights. Please stop by again anytime.
So thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. We really enjoyed this.
Well, that's all we have time for on today's episode of the GRIMM Exchange.
Remember to support the horror industry by watching films, playing games, and reading books.
Speaking of film, don't forget to check out the rest of our channel, Grimmfest TV, and watch the marvelously morbid makings of our independent filmmaking friends.
And finally, special thanks to our sponsors, Btch Cross Stitch. We'll see you next time on
The GRIMM Exchange. Bye.
If I can